Going on right now, we have the FAA, the Air National Guard, and the Coast Guard searching for the plane of John F. Kennedy Jr., a single-engine Piper Saratoga that took off last night after 8:30. We are told by sources here at ABC News, as well as sources according to the Associated Press, that Kennedy was on board, John F. Kennedy Jr., along with his wife Carolyn Bessette Kennedy and her sister. There are conflicting reports as to there were 3 or 4 people on board that plane when it took off. 3 or 4 people on board that plane when it took off. 3 or 4 people on board that plane when it took off.
Welcome. Is this my reality? Is this your reality? Welcome to Not My Reality. I'm your host, Vince Stradamus. We all know about the Kennedy family and the multitudes of tragedies that have befallen them over the years. JFK, our president, was assassinated right in front of us. His brother Bobby was assassinated too. And most likely by our own government. And then there was the tragic death of JFK Jr., JFK's son, and his pregnant wife and her sister in a plane crash on the way to an event. Just a tragic event. Or was it? We need to take a closer look back at the many puzzling questions that still remain to this very day. Let's start with the report of the National Transportation Safety Board that came out August 8th, year 2000, 13 months after the plane crash of JFK Jr. It contradicts many of the lies that were pushed in the mainstream media. For example, the LA Times, of course the LA Times, they reported, quote, the accident that killed Kennedy was caused by an inexperienced pilot, the NTSB concluded in its final report. That was in the LA Times, 7/7/2000. But in fact, the NTSB report shows that Kennedy was highly experienced. He had more than enough hours for an instructor's license. He was described by his trainers as, quote, excellent, methodical, and very, very cautious. NTSB report, page 3. The media also says the visibility was poor, but the NTSB quotes the tower manager at Martha's Vineyard, where the plane went down, saying that there were stars out and the visibility was between 10 and 12 miles. NTSB report, page 5. Why did the media lie? Why do they always lie? Why have they always lied about the murder of his father and his uncle? Here's the big question. Was John Kennedy Jr. murdered? You judge for yourself. The rescue. Look, this is enormously important. FAA radar tracked Kennedy's plane crash. The U.S. Coast Guard had reported that Kennedy contacted the tower on his final approach. This is enormously important. It means they would have known his plane was going down before it hit the water. FAA regulations require that a search begin immediately when a plane reports itself on final approach and does not land within 5 minutes. Yet it took them 14 and a half hours to send the first planes and boats to Martha's Vineyard. That was in the Boston Herald, 7/20/99. Quote, time gaps in the early hours of the search are beyond explanation. The plane, Kennedy's plane had an autopilot. This thing was capable of flying itself to within 100 feet of the airport. All a cautious and methodical pilot had to do was sit back and let the plane fly itself. NTSB report, page 18. Sabotage. Was the plane sabotaged? Now, Kennedy's plane, get this is special. It had a black box. No other private non-jet plane on Earth had one. He knew, JFK Jr. knew they wanted to take his ass out, and he wanted to make it hard for them. The NTSB says the battery had been removed, destroying all record of conversation in the cockpit. NTSB, page 10. Now, all planes have an emergency locator transmitter, an ELT. which sends out a beacon, signals in case of a crash. It took 5 days to locate Kennedy's plane. Why? Was it missing? Was it disabled? Well, the report doesn't say anything about that. Now this I really don't understand. According to the NTSB report, the fuel valve had been turned to off. NTSB report, page 12. This valve had a safety device on it so that it could not accidentally be turned off. Turning it off during flight would be insane. Since at top speed, the engine would die in about 45 seconds. Because the results are potentially deadly, this valve cannot be turned by accident. A safety release button must be pushed down and held while turning the valve. This piece of evidence, it's a smoking gun. It is positive proof of foul play. I mean, was JFK really trying to off himself, his pregnant wife, and her sister? Because if he wasn't, there can scarcely be any question but that he was murdered. So who turned this valve? We'll get to that in a little while. Kennedy's flight logbook, that's missing too. NTSB report, page 2. Now, this will be seen as critical in a little while because the logbook would have recorded the presence of a fourth person or a flight instructor on the plane. The media talked about a graveyard spiral and various forms of disorientation. The NTSB report describes Kennedy's plane making 2 mild, explainable maneuvers. And then the plane plunged drastically to the right and plummeted straight down, crashing 2,600 feet in just 45 seconds. Now, to me, it sounds like somebody grabbed the controls and suddenly shoved the plane into the water. But this description of a suicide plunge is consistent with the suicide position of the fuel valve. Kind of seems like this was intentional. The flight instructor. All the early reports said there was a flight instructor on the plane. Like the New York Times, Saturday, July 7th, 1999 said it. Then, boom, like magic, the flight instructor disappeared from all the reports. Now look, Kennedy rarely flew at night, especially without a flight instructor. Out of 310 hours of flight time and 55 hours at night, he only had 45 minutes at night without an instructor. This guy was very cautious. He had his pregnant wife on board, her sister. It's almost unthinkable that he would not have taken an instructor. And then we got Egypt Air 990. 2 months later, Egyptian Air Flight 990, with 30 of the highest ranking members of the Egyptian military on board, it crashed. It was big news for quite a while. Now get this, the pilot walked into the cockpit, said, "Allah help me," grabbed the controls and tried to force the plane into a crash. 3 other pilots grabbed him. There was a struggle. He gave up, turned around, and he had turned the fuel valve off. Kennedy's emergency locator was removed. The cockpit recorder was disabled. The flight log was taken. And the body of the flight instructor was removed, or he was trained to get out himself. But they forgot to return the fuel valve to on. They forgot. They delayed the rescue 14 hours. 14 hours to do all this. Were they waiting underwater for the plane to crash? And who was it? Who indeed? Why would anyone want to kill John Kennedy Jr.? So JFK Jr. was planning to run for national office according to Newsweek and People magazine. He told friends he would have run for the Senate in New York, but for some reason he let Hillary Clinton run instead. We can look back now and see what a disaster that turned out to be. But anyway, and he would have won. He would have beaten her too. He was one of the most popular men in the United States, and for good reason. Everyone says he was a great guy. he was the only Kennedy at that time before his wingnut uncle now, RFK Jr. That dude's batshit crazy, but that's a whole other video. He was the first one to acknowledge a conspiracy in the death of his father and his uncle. He not only acknowledged it, he published an article by Oliver Stone in his magazine George about the assassination, the conspiracies, lying history books. I mean, who would want to kill him? And by the way, when he named the magazine George, it wasn't George Washington. He named it after George Herbert Walker Bush because he knew George Herbert Walker Bush was involved in the assassination of his father via the CIA. So anyway, the people that killed his father, you kind of need to kill him too, because John F. Kennedy Jr., he was going to go after them. He wasn't shy about it. So, if we were going to hypothetically, allegedly, possibly come up with a suspect in this somehow, just pick a name out of thin air, what about George W. Bush? Okay? You know, the 9/11 guy, the housing bubble guy, they're going to get him guy, that guy. Look, Kennedy's plane went into the sea at 10 o'clock on Friday night, July 16, 1999. Bush was involved in a heated campaign with that other guy, the traitor, John McCain. And he was losing in New Hampshire. Remember that? McCain beat him in the first debate. He was constantly in public. He was constantly surrounded by reporters. So it's easy to figure out where he was. Right? Wrong. According to the Omaha World Herald, 7/17/99, on July 16th, Bush was flipping pancakes Friday morning in Des Moines, but he boarded a bus and he disappeared for the entire weekend during the campaign when he was behind. On Saturday, July 18th, reporters looking for a comment from Bush confronted a fumbling spokesperson who was unable to say when Bush would be available for comment. Newsday, 7/19/99. Bush finally called a press conference on Monday to, of course, offer his condolences. Now, we have a thought here that this was GW's offering, his sacrifice. He had to prove that he was the man to be at the helm during the upcoming 9/11 event. Not Al Gore. No, not him. They rewarded him with the climate scam. Like his skull and bones father's involvement all those years ago in Dallas when JFK, our president, was sacrificed right in front of us. The father, he went on to be president, just like GW went on to be president. Kennedys, they're both dead. Allegedly. Now, did G.W. Bush and his CIA dad, did they have something to do with JFK Jr.'s untimely end? Father sacrifices father, son sacrifices son. Both become president, the other two are done. Like father, like son. It's been decades now since the crash that took the lives of JFK Jr., his wife, their unborn child, and her sister. But we still have questions. How did all those things mentioned in this video have happened by accident? I mean, pretty much had to be intentional, right? After watching this video, what are you thinking? We raised some legitimate questions? Or this is a big to-do about nothing? Please, do us a favor. Leave a comment down below. Tell us what you think. But between me, you, and the lamppost, the CIA, the NSA, and whoever else is listening, I don't trust that Bush family at all. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Clintons were involved a little bit either. All right, I'm done. Let's get the fuck out of here.